Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. Today I'm hanging out with Jeff Lee, freelancer in the RPG industry. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing well. Thank you. Thank you very much
Hello
for
and welcome to
having
Nerdarchy
me
for
on.
Nerds by And Nerds. I'm hearing myself because I did not mute. There we
Oh,
go. Worst thing in the world. No one ever wants to hear
darn
themselves.
technology.
I know. Someone did that the other day. I'm like, dude, don't worry about it. I do that occasionally myself all the time, and I do this every day. You would think I would have it together, but
Yeah.
that's what happens when you let old people play with technology. So you've been freelancing for a while.
Yeah, about 8 years now. 8.5 years.
How did you get started, and kind of like what systems are you currently and have you worked in?
Well, I uh, I started off because I was at PaizoCon in Seattle and met Lewis Porter Jr. From LPJ Design, and we sat in the bar and had some drinks and talked games. And at the end of the night, he said, yeah, before you leave, because I mentioned wanting to break into the business. And he said, well, before you leave, come talk to me at my table, and, I'll get your contact information. You can send me some samples and we can go from there. And so he had me write him up a magic item, I think. And he liked it and said, yeah, okay, how about you do this? And that was when I got one of the most grueling projects I've ever worked on, which was like something like 96 NPC stat blocks, just straight stat blocks with, a paragraph or two of description underneath. And I mean, it was a great trial by fire, but yeah, got me into the
That's some
industry.
tedious work too.
Oh yeah, it is. And yeah,
He didn't
which
even
is,
start you with the fun stuff. He's like, here, here's some
yeah,
grueling. I mean, for what we do anyway, some
yeah,
grueling
exactly. Yeah,
mechanics to play with.
CR3, CR5, CR7, for this one, CR4, CR6, and CR9 for this one. Go.
So he
But
didn't
yeah, I
like.
mean,
You didn't even work on the story elements. It was just all the mechanical
well,
game
I
chits.
had, each NPC had a brief, background, of how they fit into the organization that they were made for. But for me, I mean, it was great because he was doing this for his Neo Exodus campaign setting, and I had never read it before. So that was me jumping in with both feet and just pouring over all this lore that was in his book. And I went, wow, this is really an amazing setting. So it got me fired up. So it was actually really easy to come up with ideas for the different characters. The grueling part is just filling in the stat blocks because,
Yeah,
as most of us know, that, Pathfinder NPC stat blocks are huge sprawling things. Not quite as streamlined as 5e.
yeah. I
But
mean, even just doing stat blocks for any system,
oh yeah.
even well, depending on how rules like, but 5e is still significant compared
Yeah,
to.
it can be a bit of a grind. I mean, there are some shortcuts. You don't have to come up with an entire character sheet, but um,
And
but it taught me some good tips. Like I said, I have templates, for monster stat blocks, for spell stat blocks, for NPCs, for various different systems.
yeah,
So if I know what I'm going to be working on, I can just cut and paste those into the document, and that's a good chunk of my work done.
yeah. Doug is our content director, and he's like he does all of our editing, so he's like they're tedious to edit too.
Yeah.
And also too, like in some ways, it's like it's also like a lower word count.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine like many freelancers are paid by the word too. So
Yep,
it is,
that's me.
yeah, dude, it is like the laborer version, right?
Right.
Of working on an RPG, right? It is compared to like the mechanic who gets like the easier jobs, and
Mm-hmm.
at the same time gets paid much more to do them.
Right. Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
in construction. So what other kind of things have you worked on? What other systems? You Pathfinder 5e.
Um, a lot of Pathfinder, a lot of 5e. Most of my 5e stuff comes through Kobold Press. Um, I I did a um, I don't know if you're familiar with Gunmetal Games.
I
They
am
did
not.
the Gunmetal Games did a cyberpunk setting initially for Savage Worlds
Okay.
called Interface Zero, and I got approached by their publisher because they were looking to do a Pathfinder compatible version, and I was originally hired on as a writer, and I would suggest checking it out. Interface Zero is an amazing setting. I mean, the world building in it is absolutely beautiful. And it's not, it has all the classic elements of cyberpunk in there, but it has a more modern feel to it. For starters, your Decker isn't plugging into the system anymore. Everything's wireless. So you literally have a partially organic computer that's been fused into your head from infancy that allows you to connect to the world around you. It's got some interesting stuff on hyper reality, and augmented reality in it. But he wanted to do a version for the Pathfinder rules, and I got hired on originally as a writer, and partway into production, the lead designer had to drop out, and for a while it looked like the entire production was just going to fold. And so I stepped in and said, well, I've already put in a lot of work on this, and I really want to see it through. Can I step in and start herding cats for you? And we pushed it through to completion. And it's a great book. But right about that time, just before we were ready to release, Starfinder came out, which had tech rules that were a lot more in line with Interface Zero. So he immediately wanted to turn around and make a Starfinder book, at which point I pretty much dropped over dead. Because I mean, I think the book tops out at somewhere around between 60 and 75,000 words. I mean, it's a big production. So I was just burnt. I was like, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to bow out. Feel free to build on anything I've done, but I can't do another one right after this. But yeah, Gunmetal Games. I've worked for a lot of smaller companies. Misfit Games and Legendary Games and Rogue Genius Games. So I've got stuff all over the map, but it's mostly Pathfinder 5e. I've done some Starfinder. I'm dipping my toes into Pathfinder Second Edition now. I've done some work there. Actually, a lot of the 2e work I did was for Legendary Games, who had been contracted by Paizo to do the anniversary edition of their Kingmaker Adventure Path. So that was a lot of fun, especially since I had been playing the video game pretty much nonstop.
Do you?
I
was just gonna say, do you have a preferred system to work in?
To work in, that's hard to say. I mean, as a player, I loved Pathfinder because of the versatility. I mean, there's so many moving parts, but at the same time, you can fine tune your character to do just about anything. I enjoy the simplicity of 5e for writing until I reach a particular lacuna where there's no, just a hole where there's no rules for a specific incident. And then I get frustrated because I'm like, how can they not have rules for this? Because I'm used to Pathfinder where they have rules for everything. I was writing an adventure and I needed sorry, not an adventure, it was a setting piece, and I needed rules for flash floods. And there's like nothing in 5e. I'm like, great, so I got to come up with all these rules from scratch. Okay, here we go. It's like, I've got swim checks, and that's about the size of it. So I had to work from there and build up on, what happens if you're, walking through a gully in this desert wasteland and a flash flood comes through. So yeah, so 5e, I enjoy the simplicity, but at times it seems a little bit too simple. because then
Yeah.
you have to build all these little things to bridge the gaps.
Yeah, I feel, in 5e, I mean, they say, what is it? They say it's, it's about rulings over rules. So
Right.
like,
Yeah.
the DMs are supposed to figure it out, which I definitely have like mixed feelings on that. Like, I like that personally, but I do understand for players that are newer to the hobby,
Right.
that how this can be problematic. Now, I don't know. I don't know if Tasha's covers this or not, but they have a section on hazards, right?
Mhm.
And I really like the way they handled it. So they took all these things that are like natural phenomenons. Like,
Mhm.
I know, like ball lightning is just
Okay.
one of the things on that list, and they're like, just use this spell. Um, it's just the list of things where they do that. So maybe they've covered your flash floods now.
It might have, yeah.
I don't know, but and I think that's kind of the things that are kind of coming up. Um, as the game progresses, because I guess like in, yeah, they do have flood and they give you a couple spells. So as the game progresses, they're kind of like pulling back on some of that stuff. And in like earlier versions, like in AD&D, like you literally had to make up everything. Like
Yeah, exactly.
there wasn't really rules for much. So
Yeah. And
um
I'm one of those DMs that I love making combats have to work around the environment. I
yeah.
love having environmental hazards and problems that the players have to overcome in addition to defeating their enemies. And I think that that makes for some very dynamic combats, especially when the players manage to find clever workarounds or actually manage to use the terrain to their advantage,
You
against the
never know
enemies.
what players are going to come up with.
Yeah.
And I agree. I do like doing stuff like that. Last night in a game, it came up where one of the NPCs was possessed by a demon, and one of the players is like, "Hey, I would really like you to not possess that NPC. Will you possess me instead?" I'm a very like yes kind of DM,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was like, "All right, let's see how this goes." So then we had to have like a mental battle after the character got possessed to see if the demon would gain control.
Nice.
Other players are like, "How can I help? How can I get into this?" And there's definitely no rules for that in the
Yeah.
game we were playing. But I'm just always like, "Sure, let's roll dice and see what happens."
Yeah.
So Brian once asked the question. On the flip side, what are some of the juiciest things to write for an RPG? He had asked when we were talking about like stat blocks and stuff.
Well, I think the juiciest is when you actually get to do world building. I love that. Just being able to come up with something that is actually going to be integral to the setting. That for me is amazing, because then you're helping bring part of somebody else's world to life, and I really enjoy that. Especially when I can add in some really weird stuff or some really creepy stuff, and get that in there. It's I mean, and flavor text is easy because well, in a sense it's easy. I mean, you still have to have that creative spark and that creative drive and a
Yeah.
concept, and flesh it out, but at the same time you don't have to stop and double check and make sure you're getting the rules right. Going, am I remembering this right? I got to stop, check the books, go
Is
back.
Megan going to yell at you?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm gonna but if I'm just doing flavor and background stuff, I can flow, and it just rolls out.
Yeah.
So that for me is probably the meatiest of the
Uh,
stuff.
Another question Brian has for you are: as a freelancer, what red flags do you look for when taking on a new project? What makes a new project worth it?
Um, mm, well, there are a number of things to consider. I mean, from a business aspect, I want to look at a company and say, well, how established are they? Are they just starting out? Have they put out products in the past? I mean, most of the companies I've worked for have been churning out products for years. for various, systems, or for one system through multiple editions. So, they're established. They've got, the business aspects down. They know how to work a contract, and are in the game. If somebody's new, or if they start talking to me about things and I'm not hearing the business lingo that I'm used to hearing, that raises some red flags. The other thing is I look at their material, if I can get some if I have some samples on hand, and see if my writing meshes with theirs. Are they working in a particular style, that is compatible with things that I normally write. But when, like, I'm doing, I've been doing this full time. This is my gig. This is what I do. I wake up in the morning, I down some coffee, I go through my check my emails, go through my morning rigmarole. Let's get another sip down here.
There you go. Still early over there.
Yeah, and get on and get on with my day, and so one of the things to consider is payment, and as a freelance writer, we're not making the big bucks here. So the other thing is knowing, whether these people that I'm potentially writing for know what the value of a freelance writer is. So without naming any names, I'm going to give an example of something that happened to me recently. A game publisher of my acquaintance was looking for people to write these little mini scenarios, like kind of like a flash fiction version of an adventure, just a real quick, like one creature, one room sort of deal that you could probably, drop into a dungeon anywhere. And and they had asked people on their page, if you could pick anybody to write these, who would you want? And apparently somebody mentioned my name. So he messaged me, asked if I wanted to do it. And I said, that sounds interesting. He says, well, how much do you normally charge? And I gave him my low end and my high end rates. And then he turned around and offered me 1/8 of my low end rate.
Oh,
1/8.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was so shocked. I didn't know how to respond to that without using words that you probably shouldn't use with a potential business partner.
Yeah.
So I said, I'll tell you what, it's a little late in the evening. Let me sleep on it and I'll get back to you in the morning. So in the morning, I managed to politely decline. And he actually sounded surprised that I had turned him down. And I'm like, dude, I got to eat. I can't. I mean, it was just weird.
Especially like now, right? Like I've heard like super low, like 2 to 3 cents a word. Mm-hmm. Like I think like Watts pays like 10 cents a word, and then Matt Colville comes out of nowhere with 20 cents a word. D&D Beyond also pays really well. I don't know exactly what the number is.
I'm sorry, what was that one you said, 20 cents a word? I'm going to write that down.
Matt Colville.
Thank you. Okay, here we go.
I've heard that floated around. But so the industry is really weird, and it is starting to come up. But like, for the longest time, the ceiling's been Wizards of the Coast, right?
Yeah.
And that ceiling's been 10 cents a word.
Yeah.
So when we did our first book in Out of the Box Encounters, very similar to what you just described, and it was posted on our website that someone had just contributed. Mm-hmm. And I was like, hey, we want to do a Kickstarter for this and make this a project, a product. How do you feel about it? And we'll pay you, 5 cents a word. At this point, like, we have no idea what it's going to do, how it's going to go. Right. And they had kind of like donated it before anyway. So they're like, oh, you want to pay me? I like this. And the Kickstarter did really well. So we paid them much more than that, actually, because it did do well. And we try and pay well, but it's hard as a small business, small company. But then I feel like then there's also people out there that are also trying to try to take advantage as
Yeah.
well. I suspect like Monty Cook Games, they probably pay pretty well as well.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a small industry, and eventually everybody knows everybody.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like people
But
are going to figure it out, and your secret rates aren't going to stay secret,
right. Yeah. People are going to
forever.
talk. People are going to talk. They're gonna. They're
Yeah.
gonna. They're gonna. And it's either going to be glowing or not so much.
Yeah. I mean, for us, like we've got a couple paid staff writers on the website, which it took us a while to get to that because for the longest time the website was just a loss leader. It's like you don't get that money back. It wasn't
Right. Yeah.
until we came out and had a premium product and we've been getting, we get regular sales for that though. Now it's like, oh, this is awesome because now,
Yeah.
these people that have been contributed to us, we can actually pay them.
Right.
And
Just to circle back to Brian's question, just one more thing I want to point out for freelance writers is contracts are important.
very,
I mean, when I started with LPJ Design, it was more of a by email agreement, but contracts are good for both the publisher and the writer because then you've got all your corner cases covered. How things are going to go, and you've got legal recourse. If things do happen to go south on one end or the other. So I think that's important. It's just good business. Make sure you
yeah.
got a decent contract. Even if it's just a boilerplate.
This industry is kind of notorious for a lot of like handshake deals.
Yeah.
And a lot of part-timers. I know
Mhm.
Lord knows we've been guilty of it enough. And I've also signed contracts that I didn't like afterwards, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's important. And it's hard because you know what? Lawyers are expensive, right? When you
Yes.
start talking about contracts,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're also talking about lawyers.
Right.
Uh I know my attorney, it's like, oh, if I call him, it's gonna cost me $85
Mhm.
bare minimum at the start of that phone call.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. And I've got a couple of contracts that I think are about 5 going on 6 years old now that I may never see the money from.
yeah,
And it would probably cost me more for a legal consultation than I would actually collect from those contracts if they came due. So well, they've already come due. They just, but if they actually paid me now, it would be less money than what it would cost me to actually try to get a legal opinion to pursue getting that money. So sometimes you just have to, yeah.
that's
You know,
all the fun. All the fun of being self-employed,
yeah.
being a small business. I mean,
Mhm.
even like I used to work in construction, and like big part of that job, if you own a construction company, is chasing people for money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's, things can be tight, but I mean, I love what I do, and it gives me a flexible schedule. I can work on other things like, I mean, I do some short fiction writing. I've been blocking out a novel now for a while that I can hopefully get some traction on once I've got a little more time to work on it. But it's like I used to work in a boot factory here in town. Um, and where I'd go in 9 to 5 and help crank out 200 pairs of boots a day. And I was in the sanding department grinding down heels and getting things smoothed out so they could go into the next room to get get the polish slapped on them and buffed out. And
wait a minute,
um
real quick.
okay.
Is the pandemic bringing flashbacks to that with all the masking and
um
PPE?
Kind of, except that actually I would prefer to have the masks that we had there because my bosses were cheap. So instead of getting us actual dust masks,
Yeah,
they would buy us the cheap medical PPE,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
not a dust filter.
No,
So I mean, I still, when I go when it's wintertime and I go from the warm air inside to the cold air outside, spend a minute trying to hack up a lung
yeah,
because of all the stuff I accumulated the years I worked there. But the reason I brought it up is the reason that I'm glad I'm doing this is because one day I had gone in after a sleepless night, and about 2 hours into work, I was literally falling asleep standing up at this belt sander.
Not good.
And and I was working the heel of a boot, and it's basically just taking it and turning it back and forth over the belt sander until you get the nice even shape on the back of the heel. And this was a cowboy boot, so there was a spur shelf where the spur's supposed to sit. And I fell asleep, my eyes closed, and when my eyes opened again, that shelf was gone, and I was starting to rub off the leather on the back end of the boot. I mean, I had literally sanded this boot in my sleep just by pure muscle memory.
Yeah.
And that was about the time I realized I really need to get out of this.
I've been doing this too long.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I used to do heavy construction, and I worked overnights, and the hours were always very odd, right? It wasn't like a standard, oh, you work third shift. It was like, you go in this time range and you get home at this time range. And many times coming home, I would do what was called unscheduled lane changes. And like luckily when I'm driving, there's not like a lot of traffic, and rumble strips are awesome. They're giving you a nickname, and I'm loving it. And I would be in the left lane all of a sudden. I'm like, I was in the right lane. I have no idea how I got there. So yeah, I don't miss that stuff. All near death experiences are now fictional. In the chat, they're calling you Jeff the Sandman Lee.
Nice. I like it. Thank you. Okay.
Doug wants to know, have you played a character with the expertise in cobbler's tools and drawn on your experience?
I have not. I have not. I have, however, used actually just recently, because I got my group. Shh, buddy. Sorry, my dog.
It's fine. I got a puppy as well.
It's okay, bud. I know. Hang on. I may have to take a short break here because my partner's still asleep, and this guy's got a bladder the size of a pea.
If you got it, you got it.
But here, come here.
Animals know.
This is Pippin, by the way. This
Pippin.
is the little guy.
Animals know the internet is meant for them, and they need to be. They need to be in it at all times.
I'll just hold him. He should be fine. You're good, aren't you? Yeah. All right. But
I was wondering if you had a cat or a dog over there. I heard the scratching.
We have two dogs and two cats. The cats have strangely made themselves scarce. Usually they're in here lurking in my office, which, as you can see from the background behind me, is my sanctum sanctorum.
Yes. There's been comments in the chat about that. They approve.
Well, that's what I've always called my personal space. Wherever I relax or let my creativity out. So it seemed appropriate for
that makes sense. I believe just before coming down, my wife was running to Walmart to get a new leash because the dog ate their other leash while they were in the car. Because this dog is like the most spoiled animal on the planet that we have now. So whenever she goes somewhere, the dog goes with, and they'll just put the dog on its harness. It's attached to the seatbelt and just leave the leash on. But she decided to eat the leash.
Actually, we've got to pick up a new leash ourselves because this little guy chewed through the one that we had.
Yeah, so that's another important part about being a freelancer and working for yourself. You need a dog.
Yeah. I was that. Yeah, I think it was actually a peanut strip that coined the term fuzzy therapy. Sometimes you just need to cuddle with a fuzzy animal and let the stress flow out.
That makes sense. Yeah, they are de-stressing. So what are you working on nowadays?
I've got a few things. Some I can talk about, some I can't. On as far as Kobold Press, I was here to be a Kobold, wasn't I? I should probably talk about some of their stuff. I've got the Kobold Press has a blog on their website, and one of the things I've been doing recently is revisiting a book I worked on for them in 2015, 2016, Demon Cults and Secret Societies, which, is a collection of various organizations that a DM can throw into their campaign to be villains, or occasionally, you could even have them as good guys or allies. But mostly they're there for players to fight.
I have that
So,
somewheres.
yeah.
Oh, I'm looking at it now. It's on my shelf.
Okay. Yeah. So we've got one of the cults in there is known as the Emerald Order, and they're a group, a cabal of arcanists that have unearthed this artifact called the Emerald Tablets, which were written by the god Thoth himself, and contain the keys to all the secrets of the universe. And they jealously guard this information and consider themselves the only ones worthy of this information. So they have to protect it and then learn from it and get their hooks into society to maintain control. So I've been expanding on that in a series of articles on Kobold Press, adding some additional options, including some for the players in case they want to, if they have a wizard that wants to join the Emerald Order. I came up with a a piece where you can actually have a player that's in the organization or may have formerly been in the organization, and either quit or been driven out. Some new magic items, spells, etc. And from there, we're jumping off into some new cults that were not in the original book, including one that is a cult of the void.
Ooh.
Where they deal with the terrible, maddening blackness between the stars, and they're basically a nihilistic cult that wants to see the end of all things. Their worship is around Needhog, who is the great serpent that gnaws at the roots of the world tree, and will eventually cause it to collapse. And that's what they look for. They want things to fall apart.
Are you working on the Kickstarter that's going on now?
I am not. However, considering some of the things that have been brought up as stretch goals, I'm expecting at some point Wolfgang will probably tap me on the head and say, "Hey, you wanna give us this, that, and the other thing," and I'll be there to go, "Yes, sir, I will."
Yeah.
But yeah, the Southlands Kickstarter, which looks amazing. I mean, Richard Green has done an amazing job on this stuff. Is something I'm looking forward to, because that's where initially, when I did Demon Cults and Secret Societies, a lot of them were tied to the Southlands, either by locale or by the characters that were in them. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of this, and hopefully manage to provide some supporting stuff to it.
Nice. So if you had your run of anything you could work on that project, what would it be?
Well, they I do believe there's some new Emerald Order stuff coming down the tubes, which may probably be based on some of the stuff that I've written that's going up on the blog now, but
Okay.
I'm sure they'll probably expand on that as well. I would actually like to do some stuff. There was another group that I did called the Cult of the White Ape, which was in the more southern, Southlands, in the jungles, where this terrible cult of this ape-like demon god was resurrected after being put down by the locals there, centuries before that. And then some stupid northerner came down, poking around in the ruins, and managed to reawaken the spirit of the white ape god, and bring this cult back into existence.
It sounds like a new Warlock patron to me.
It actually, when I initially did Demon Cults and Secret Societies, it was for Pathfinder, and the not a warlock, but the leader of the cult was a summoner.
Mm.
And so his eidolon was a manifestation of the White Ape demon god. You know, it was this big 4-armed, you know, snowy monster of a simian. Um, but you know, I think it'd be interesting to do some stuff there. There was actually also a disease that these intelligent white apes that lived in the jungle that were servants of the cult carried, that actually afflicts spellcasters, and causes, you know, it can actually be spread by casting spells on other people.
Oh,
You know,
nice.
which was kind of nice, you know. And you know, I'd like to be able to maybe do actually doing an adventure where an outbreak of that disease happens, and say, you know, Nuria Natal or one of the other cities in the northern part of the Southlands would be kind of great. You know, having players try to scramble to stem the plague without catching it themselves would be kind of fun.
So Doom Paladin wants to know what you did for the Empire of the Ghoul
Oh,
project, and they're curious if you did anything with mushroom folk.
I did not do anything with mushroom folk. In Empire of the Ghouls, I did chapter 3, the Blood Wedding. Was my portion of the adventure path, which was fun, because I delight in creeping out players and scaring characters. And there was one section in there that I had to do that was a significant portion of the Northlands in Midgard, that had a small blurb written about it, like maybe a paragraph or two in the book, and I had to flesh that out for part of the, you know, for the adventure. And it was very bare bones. You know, basically you've got a dwarven clan that for some reason or another has been denied the afterlife, and the clan was wiped out, and none of these people could pass on. So you've got all these undead dwarves that were wandering around their clan home, and then someone comes in and breaks in, so the undead escape into the nearby forest. So you've got and the PCs have to cross through this area to get to their final destination. So you've got this forest with all these undead dwarves, just, you know, by the thousands wandering around it. And I was like, all right, how do I flesh out that particular portion of the realm without just turning it into a hack and slash slog of chopping your way through an army of undead to get from point A to point B.
It's not good for your
And
health at all.
yeah, and the funny thing was, I was kind of stumped on that for a while. And my breakthrough, I was taking a break, because when I write, I have a couple of Pandora stations. I've got my regular one, which is all my normal music I listen to. For my writing, all the music on my writing channel is either completely instrumental,
Mm-hmm.
or in languages I don't speak. So that I'm
So
not,
the
you know,
words don't
so the
distract you,
words don't, I don't get distracted. I don't start singing along, you know.
or typing.
So yeah, or well, you know, typing out. Yeah. So I've got, you know, so I've got this channel, and then I you know, when I'm taking a break, I switch back to my normal channel, and I was listening, and Home by the Sea by Genesis came on.
Okay.
And I started singing along, and suddenly I had the idea. I knew what I was going to do. So you know, and you know, I don't want to spoil the adventure for anyone that hasn't written it yet, but that was my inspiration for how the undead in that forest interact with the party as they move through. And I think it's even better than having them attack. It's great. It's creepy, and it's insidious, and it's really a difficult situation for the characters to actually have to overcome to get through. And that's all I'm gonna say about that. But yeah, Blood Wedding was mine. A lot of cannibalism. You've got the vampires and the ghoul empire, who are trying to put together this symbolic wedding between two representatives of their deities that will, you know, it's that whole as below, so above sort of idea, where
Yeah.
they unify. Their union basically symbolizes a union between the two deities, and that makes things even worse for the characters if they're not able to foil it. So that was my section of the adventure there, and I was really really happy with the work I did on that. As far as the player's guide goes, I did a bit on a splinter cult of Morena, who's a blood goddess, who is actually the goddess of the vampires, but um, it was for a sect that believes that the vampires have taken too much of Morena's attention, and so they're actually loyal worshippers of this evil goddess who want to defeat the vampires because they think that that living people should be the actual favored class rather than the vampires, because the vampires are simply parasites that feed on the blood. It was it's the living people that actually have the blood themselves, and therefore should be in the high position. So that was kind of fun to do, because
Isn't that like putting the cow in charge?
you, you might, the vampires would argue that yes, that is it, but obviously this particular
Yeah.
splinter cult would disagree, and have plenty of pointy sticks to get their to drive their point home.
Yeah. So you brought it up something that I wholeheartedly agree with, and then when you mentioned more interesting than just having the monster attack or have them fight, and arguably I would say generally having the monster be fought or attack is usually the least interesting thing you can do as a GM, or and players as well. I always like to leave it open to, like, are there other ways to resolve this, or different thing, or have this play out in a way that might not be typical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I see this a lot in on various discussion boards where people ask questions like, well, my players didn't actually kill the monster. They did this and this and this and managed to get past it. Should I still give them experience for the encounter? And I'm like, and every time I see that question, I have to respond with an emphatic, yes, you do.
Give them more.
Yeah, exactly. Give them a bonus for creativity if you want, but never stiff your PCs or your players for, coming up with creative solutions to problems. That should be rewarded and encouraged, because that helps provide a depth to the game that you wouldn't normally get. I mean, you could go play Hackmaster if you want to just chop through everything that's in your path, but encourage your players to come up with creative solutions and have their characters work around situations without having to fight everything with a sword and a spell. That would be my advice to anybody playing any game ever. Be creative, work to your strengths. Don't always take the obvious road.
It's that's sound advice for sure. So are you getting much gaming in?
Not as much as I would like. I have a small group that meets twice a month, masked and socially distanced, because I online gaming is a great innovation, but I mean, for my job, I sit in front of this computer
Yeah.
for 8 to 12 hours a day sometimes, staring at this screen. So part of my relaxation is being able to step away from the computer, and so I still try to get my in-personal, my interpersonal gaming in person without the use of the computer, and that provides me with some much needed relaxation. But so not as much as I'd like, but it's still coming in. Right now, as I mentioned to you prior to this, we're just dipping our feet into Pathfinder Second Edition, and I'm finding I'm really liking the system. And I since my players are primarily Pathfinder players, it's a little easier transition. Although I do plan on doing some 5e in the future, just to try out my players are my guinea pigs.
Yeah.
When I want to play test a particular thing I've written, I'm like, okay, guys, today, ta-da, here you go. So right now, I have an adventure path that I would like to pitch to possibly Kobold Press or another publisher if they're not interested, and doing it in Pathfinder 2e right now is just to so I can run the narrative, but I'm using the mechanics. It may I may publish it in another system, 5e or something else, depending on what works best. But it's kind of a gothic horror feel to this particular campaign. I don't want to talk too much about it, but I mean, it's got this small village in it that the players are based in, with a bunch of weird, creepy characters, kind of like Twin Peaks meets American Gothic.
Nice.
In flavor, and and right now they're working through a murder mystery, which is kind of fun because they're not getting a lot of chance to hack and slash, and they're having to deal more with the characters in town and the weird things that are going on, and then that provides them with sort of the atmosphere that they're going to work in when they start going abroad and actually dealing with the evils in the area. So it's fun, but yeah, not as much gaming as I'd like, but I am getting some in, and it's really a balm for my soul.
So Doomed Paladin says Kobold Press needs novels. You should shout that over on their social medias or email them. That would be much more useful there. But
I have seen people say that a few times, and honestly, I don't know that there's anything in the works there. But I definitely would read some Midgard based fiction. I actually have written a piece or two based in Midgard that were short stories that I think are probably sitting in a slush pile somewhere, because they never actually made it into anything. But
have they ever tested short stories on their website for their
they have, in fact, that's what I wrote, that's what I wrote the short fiction for. I sent it in for the website, but at this point I don't know that there's any plans to publish it. But I mean, for me, like the Forgotten Realms novels that Wizards put out, I used to read those voraciously because I love getting that extra bit of flavor of the campaign world, and actually seeing how people interact and
the
how
stories they would tell.
the stories they would tell outside of a gaming perspective, because to me that added a layer of depth to the world that I think is missing in the actual gaming products. So if you have if you have the setup for it, I think that's a good way to go for some companies, is to provide that background.
I don't know what the logistics are over there. How profitable it is, because they don't do it anymore other than RA, pretty much. But yeah, like I mean, I think I've read enough of those novels between Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance that you could hide behind. And I also, and at the same time, like I find, as for a D&D game, I find them kind of boring to play in. Like I just generally don't like other people's generic fantasy campaign settings, right? At that point, I'd rather make my own.
Yeah, I loved the Dragonlance novels. Hated playing in that world.
Yeah.
For me, it did not translate well into the RPG setting. It was just
like for settings, I was always more into like Ebron and Dark Sun, Ravenloft, things that were very, very different from your standard D&D.
Yeah, I loved Planescape. Planescape for me was an awesome place to romp through. But yeah, most of my gaming has taken place in homebrew worlds of my own. My current one now is called The Wounded World, which is it's a system that a campaign setting that a co-DM of mine and I created at the advent of 3rd edition D&D, because we figured if we were going to move to a new edition, we'd want a new world to play in. So we collaborated on this thing, and it's sort of it's a fantasy setting, but it's a post-apocalyptic fantasy setting.
Oh, cool.
So the world is basically struggling on after this massive magical blowout that was caused by these two great armies clashing, and it provides a lot of weird stuff going on, a lot of interesting, cool new settings to work in, and basically bent the rules a little bit, because what happened was you had these two armies that are bringing in these massive armies of fiends from the planes to do their dirty work for them, and it was bringing so much chaos and evil into the world that the gods had to step in directly and slam down what I called the interdiction, which basically closed off all access to the lower planes to this world. And that shield is being actively held in place, which had two major effects. One, summoning magic doesn't work as well as as you would expect, because you don't have a direct connection to the outer planes to actually get the creatures in that you want. Not to mention the Inquisition, where where the gods' agents went through and actively destroyed all summoning knowledge they could find, and killed a lot of the summoners to prevent things like this happening again. The second thing is that all the creatures that were already here couldn't leave. They can't go home anymore. So that has some interesting implications on the game world itself. So that is, that's the world that most of my players tend to tramp around in a lot. And I'm hoping, someday that, that I'll be able to actually get that into publication. Although people that subscribe to my Patreon can get tastes of the Wounded World and the things that come out of that.
So Brian has a question, and this is pretty interesting, so I definitely want to get this. I'm writing up a Warlock patron for my niece that is a Banshee who wants to assemble her ancestors at her table for tea. Any thoughts on what boons she can grant?
Ooh, that's interesting. Okay, so does she want that? Does she want to assemble them? Wait, where are we talking? Wait, read the question again, just so I'm wrapping my head around this.
Yeah. So I'm writing up a Warlock patron for my niece that is a Banshee who wants to assemble her ancestors at her table for tea. Any thoughts on what boons she could grant? So I guess the question is, who wants the? I'm taking it as the niece wants to assemble the ancestors.
Right. Okay.
And not,
right. Yeah. That's kind of interesting. I mean, you could. One of the things you could do is, I would say, is maybe have a. You can consider that almost like a boon that would be like a divinatory thing, where she actually can sit down with her ancestors, consult them, and ask questions, get answers to problems that she needs. Sort of like maybe a speak with dead with extra benefits.
Regular tea parties with the ancestors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she sits down. I mean, and that would be kind of a fun visual for the other players too, because she goes off by herself and they see her sitting down, having a cup of tea and chatting with people that they can't see, and then coming back later and going, "Okay, guys, I figured out how we're going to do this."
Yeah, or even like a portent style benefit, where it's like that's the mechanic. At this certain time of day, you have tea with the ancestors and the conversation, like you said, but then it grants the benefit that you can use later.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
As the mechanical part. Oh, that would be fun.
Or even like insight bonuses.
At
some point during, maybe the what she gets at the tea party isn't clear to her at first, but at some point later in the campaign, in a situation, it suddenly hits her. Oh, that's what they were talking about. And then it provides, say, a bonus to a die roll or a saving throw or something that,
Yeah. And it's just this rich, it becomes like that's That the warlock's version of studying their spell book is the
Yeah,
teacher.
or but yeah, they
Mm.
it's just the idea that she retains the things that they talked about, but it doesn't make immediate sense in the conversation. But later on, when the adventure unfolds, that's when the information hits, and they go, oh yeah, all right, I know what my what great auntie so and so was talking about when she said this, and then apply
Yeah.
the bonus would be
And then like the different abilities they get as they level up, you just name them after like the ancestor, or yeah,
yeah.
doing paladin set aside of grandma's disapproving of your decisions. You could literally like an ability grandma's disapproval, or
Yeah, yeah,
auntie knows best, or things like that.
right, yeah. uh, Uncle Bob's sage advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Or Uncle Bob's wacky ramblings. It causes a confusion effect on your enemies or
Yeah, yeah,
something. I don't know. Yeah, I mean that could be a lot of fun. I think there's definitely things in there. Brian has talked about it, getting his nieces and nephews, I think, into the game for a while,
nice, love
and
it.
customizing stuff. Gotta get the youngins in there,
Yes.
for sure.
Hmm.
So you mentioned your Patreon, and we have a link to your Patreon and some other things in the description. I think just threw the Southland Kickstarter in there because that's going on now, and you freelance for Kobold a lot, as well as the articles that you write over there, so people can check that stuff out in the description. What kind of stuff can they expect over on your Patreon?
um a lot of a lot of varying things. That my Patreon is basically where I bounce my ideas off of and see what sticks. um and I do a lot of fun stuff there, just quirky things that catch my attention, and I go, I want to do that, but I don't have an outlet for it. Like there's a post that I've seen floating around on the internet for a while now, called dumb magic items, and it's just like a bullet list of these really you know weird things. Like I'll bring up a quick example here. um the of course.
That's how it goes when you want something. Where's it at?
Yeah, it's like I know it should be in this folder, but this just means I didn't put it in my folder. I'm usually very good about putting things where they belong.
Yeah, organization is a very important skill. Unfortunately, I'm not trained in it.
Yeah, I'm not. I force myself to be, because otherwise, I would lose my head if it were not firmly attached.
I
Um,
fully understand that. I
but
attribute a lot of that to the.
yeah, all right. Well, all right. Let me give you an example that I remember off the top of my head immediately. There's among the dumb magic items that are listed. There's one where it's a sword that inflicts emotional wounds. You know,
Nice.
or a set of goggles that imposes black bars over any aberrations you encounter. You know, and at first glance, they seem like dumb magic items, but I was like, well, what if we actually work these into something that you could actually use in a game? So, like, the goggles actually do put up these black bars. Anytime you encounter anything that is of the aberration type, these black bars appear, so you don't actually get to see what the thing is. But at the same time, it also protects you from the effects
Okay.
that would get. So there are disadvantages and advantages. One, they have, they're constantly obscured, but at the same time, anything that they throw at you, you have advantage on your saving throws against.
I
So
totally dig those kind of magic items that have like a boon and bane kind of
yeah,
to them.
yeah. And then like the sword that deals emotional wounds. I did up versions for Pathfinder and 5e. I may have actually had a Pathfinder 2e too. So that's also interesting, because that gives me that exercise of working out, how do I get this concept to apply to this particular rule set. And so, you know, they end up being similar, but at the same time, they've got their own little quirks and flavor that, you know, is more fitting to the setting that that I'm writing in. Little things like that. I've got this one, and a lot of the stuff I do, if you go to my Patreon page, is free to the public. You know, you can view a lot of these posts. Others are specific, you know, to my patrons. The other thing is my patrons get to provide me with ideas. You know, if they want to see something, then all they have to do is leave me a message and say, hey, could you, you know, write up a particular monster based on this, or, you know, here's a weird picture, would you stat this for me?
Yeah.
Nice. You know, and I'll do it, because, you know, I am at your beck and command.
We call that the dance monkey tier.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Yeah. And the great thing is that, you know, for as little as $1 a month, you can provide that to me, and I'll, you know, do my best to get it to you. Granted, the people that are paying me more a month, you know, have preference, but that does not mean that does not mean you will be ignored.
That's
especially if you have a really good idea.
Capitalism.
Yeah, especially if you have a really good idea that, you know, sparks, you know, the synapses, then I'm all over it.
Nice. With that, we are up on the hour mark, and today I'm a little pressed for time, so I got to stick to the schedule. I want to thank you for coming on. Final thoughts before we head on out?
Well, thank you for having me. And final thoughts, I would say that, if you appreciate my Patreon, I appreciate your patronage. If you were a fan of Kobold Press, keep an eye on the blogs, because I've got a lot of really cool cult stuff coming out in the near future. And for all you gamers out there, well, just a random thought, because of something I thought of in our previous discussion. Read some mythology. Check out some old fairy tales and folk tales, because that's where all this stuff is rooted. And one of the things that I noticed with the new generation is that they don't have those connections, you know, because they haven't read a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, they're getting a lot of their inspiration from anime and movies, which is great. I mean, I do too, you know, but you know, like, you know, if you're bringing your nieces and nephews and children into the game, you know, get them a book of mythology for Christmas, or a book of old folk tales or fairy tales, you know, because I mean, I think that, you know, is where the roots of this stuff lie. And I think you can get some really great ideas and inspiration out of them.
There's a YouTube channel called The Mythology Guy. And we kind of, we stole one of his TikToks and made it the source of a video that'll be coming up in the near future. And it was just based off of like an Irish legend. I mean, obviously we give him credit and everything like that, but it was just a cool thing. And it was like, you know, real quick, and you can get kind of the information and the idea. Mythology obviously is awesome. It's kind of like the gateway drug for a lot of us, for gamers. Thanks for coming on, Jeff. It's been great chat with you, and to everyone else, until next time, stay nerdy.